This is the new Sirui Anamorphic 50mm lens, and I've used it for photos. Because since last year, I've been playing around with the idea of using anamorphic lenses for photography to get these panoramic photos. I've shot some portraits in Tokyo, I've shot some street photography in Tokyo and New York, and also more portraits in New York, and I freaking love the results. But the lens I've been using, which was the Sirui Anamorphic Venus lens, 35mm t2.9, it's freaking huge. It's so big that it kind of never found its way to my bag when I was doing, wedding photography. So when I was packing for a wedding, I kind of always considered bringing this one, but because of the size of the weight, I couldn't pull a trigger just for a couple fun photos. Also, that 35mm gives a 22mm field of view horizontally, which is very wide. So for a very long time, I've been eyeing on a 50mm version of this lens, but again, because of the size and the weight, I just couldn't pull the trigger knowing I'm gonna use it just occasionally. And that brings me to this beauty, which is a lens from a new series of lenses from Sirui called Saturn, and it's less than a half of the size of a Venus lenses. The one I have is 50mm, so I finally get to test out 50mm. I took it with me for a trip to Barcelona and I freaking love the results. So let's dive in. First of all, disclaimer, this is a sample unit I got for this review from Sirui. Second disclaimer, these lenses are made for video first. These are not specifically made for photography. And while I have shot some clips in Barcelona, I'm not a filmmaker and my take on this lens is particularly for photography purposes. And starting with the unboxing, it's actually pretty interesting because the lens is vacuum sealed. But as soon as you get this out of the box, you'll notice how small and compact it is. The second thing you're gonna notice is that carbon fiber front barrel element. I actually wish it was a focusing ring. I would love to use it to focus. Sadly, it's not. The focusing ring is down here next to the aperture ring, and both are gear friendly for follow focus and video stuff. And these are identical across the whole lineup of these lenses. So there's a 35mm lens, there's a 50 and 75, and they all have those two rings in the same position. Other than that, there's not much on this lens itself. There's no switches, no buttons, but the build is really solid. The rings, they're super smooth and nice. And the mount I have is a Sony E-mount, but there's multiple mounts available. I think all of the mounts actually. Oh, except Nikon. Sorry, Nikon fanboys and girls. Let's talk using this for photos, because as soon as you're gonna mount this lens on your camera, and the camera I have been using is a Sony a7R5, what you're gonna see is gonna be the squeezed image, because that lens is a 1.6 anamorphic squeeze. What does it mean? It means you don't get to see the final image when taking a picture. There's no way to unsqueeze the footage, at least not on any of the Sony photo-centric cameras. And for video cameras, there is an option to de-squeeze, but there's no 1.6 option. And also the squeeze options, at least in Sony cameras, are only for video modes. So for taking photos, there is no way you can see unsqueezed footage. So that's, I think, the biggest bummer when using anamorphic lenses for photos, because it's slightly harder to compose without seeing the actual, de-squeezed image. But also on a bright side, it's there's this anticipation happening. So you take photos and you have to wait until you see the final result, just like shooting film. You have to develop film. So here you have to unsqueeze the footage, and this is very rewarding, to be honest. My workflow was importing the images to Lightroom and first applying my edits. So I was first applying my preset, then I was opening the image in Photoshop, de-squeezing by reducing the height of the image. So I go to image size, I reduce the height from 100% to 63.5%, and voila, that's the final image. Command S for save, and I'm back in Lightroom. All of the photos you're gonna see here are edited with my Magicadabra presets, and I just added 2 more presets to the pack. There's Flat Magic that I added like 2 months ago, and there's new black and white silver soft preset, which I freaking love, and these are free for everyone who already purchased the pack. So if you're the owner, make sure to re-download the pack. If you don't own the presets yet, just check them out in the description. And looking at these images, let's take a moment to admire that glorious flare. It's freaking amazing. So with anamorphic lenses, you get this horizontal flare. Like there are 2 versions of the Saturn lenses. One come with a blue flare, which is like a typical anamorphic flare. You know this from movies, and the Venus lens that I've had before had a blue flare. But now I chose the option for neutral flare, which takes the color of the light source. So my light source in all of these photos was like sun setting, so we have this beautiful orange flare, but also it's not just that horizontal line. When you have the light really low on the horizon, you get tons of these nice things happening on the frame, something that I really look forward to, because like all of my G Master lenses, none of them flare. So I'm really happy to finally have a lens with a glorious flare in my arsenal. On a technical note, the lens itself, it's quite sharp in the center, it's less sharp on the edges. Also, it's a manual focus lens, and you're focusing when seeing squeezed footage, so it's slightly problematic to actually nail the focus every single time. And also there's quite strong chromatic aberration, especially I saw this in this particular picture of a Christmas decoration in Barcelona. You have this crystals backlit and they're just all purple because of, you know, the purple fringing. So I had to remove that in post. Also, there's a slight of barrel distortion compared to the Venus lens that had this huge pincushion distortion, and with a wide angle lens like this, it was actually really disturbing for me. So for this 50mm, I actually do not mind that barrel distortion, because all of these 3 flaws of that lens, so not super sharp on the edges, chromatic aberration, and distortion, are actually giving some character to the image. I'm not looking for another perfect, super sharp, smooth bokeh lens, because I have G Master lenses for that. I'm looking for something extra. I'm looking for something with character, and that lens gives me that. Since I'm focusing mostly on shooting portraits with this lens, the biggest problem for me is the minimal focus distance, which is 0.9 meters or 3 feet, especially with a lens that has aperture of 2.9. You know, getting closer to the subject could give me more background blur, so that would be something that I would wish for. This is the closest portrait I could get, so you can still see a lot of background blur, but I wish it was more, especially with a lens that has like this interesting character in the background. If you want to look at these images at your own pace, there's a link to my blog. You can go to the website and just look at the images. My overall thoughts of this lens is I freaking love it, and it's definitely gonna find its way to my bag for next year's weddings. I'm actually already excited to shoot some more portraits with this lens to, you know, use that amazing anamorphic flare. If you want to order the lens, check the link in the description, and also make sure to check these videos with me shooting anamorphic lenses in Tokyo and New York. And yeah, thanks for watching. I see you guys very soon. Bye bye.